In today's episode, two car thieves breaking into vehicles at a convention in Florida are caught red-handed by the police. One is tackled to the ground. The other takes off running from the police. In a desperate attempt to get away, he jumps in a lake home to a massive alligator. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying alligator attack on Justo Padron. Welcome to Final Affliction. The Miccosukee Indian Reservation Resort and Convention Center in Dade County is almost always packed. The high tourist season brings plenty of visitors who come for the airboat tours of the Everglades and the swanky facilities that have great food, spas, and all sorts of entertainments. And in the off-season, the place is booked to the brim with conventions and end-of-year functions. November 2007 was at the time of year when Miami is at its quietest. The summer winds down, and there's just enough heat left to still get a good look at some of the fantastic wildlife in the swamps. This is a time when the tourists are gone, and the Miami natives make use of their beautiful surroundings just before the dry season kicks into full gear. Miccosukee had two functions going on that day. One was an engineering convention, and the other was a farewell for some big-shot Wall Street-type executives. The day was looking like it was going to be a busy one, but not more than usual. The crowd was made up of academics and older business types, all wearing lanyards to get them access to their various seating arrangements and sleeping quarters. This rather boring crowd was exactly what they needed after the chaotic back-to-back events that they had hosted in the past 3 months. The lack of activity might have been a relief for Miccosukee, but not so much for the underbelly of Miami. The two car thieves prowling the parking lot were getting desperate. High season brought plenty of pockets to pick on overcrowded streets, and more than enough cars were accidentally left unlocked by distracted tourists. So Heriberto Rubio and Justo Padron turned to the resorts and hiking trails to fund their criminal careers. Today, they weren't after pocket change. They were looking for cars that still had their keys in the ignition or hidden under seats. If they could get a car out of the lot, they'd have it stripped and the parts sold off before the end of the day. Both men were well into their 30s, and this was how they'd gotten by since their teens. Neither Heriberto nor Justo wanted anything to do with the violent crime sector. At least, this version of criminality was violence-free and low-risk, and the people they targeted were almost certain to have car insurance anyway, so they didn't feel too guilty about the thievery that was about to take place. The two slinked behind bushes all morning, only coming out when the parking lot emptied completely. They found two unlocked cars and stole a few electronics and some money in the glove compartments, but neither of the vehicles had any keys in them. But they weren't deterred. Someone was bound to come along and leave a set behind, so they waited patiently for the right opportunity to arrive. Unbeknownst to them, they'd left the door to one of the cars that they'd targeted slightly ajar, an expensive sedan that held a laptop and some banknotes that they hid in the bushes where they were hidden. The owner of the vehicle broke away from the engineering convention to retrieve his computer, only to discover the open door and the missing laptop. He alerted the resort manager of the theft, and the staff immediately contacted authorities. While the furious engineer waited in the reception area for police, Heriberto and Justo were already back in the lot. Unaware of the police, Heriberto continued searching unlocked cars and finally found a car with its keys still in the ignition. He called Justo just as he was getting in on the driver's side, and the two police cars pulled in behind them. Justo saw them first, and after yelling a quick warning to his companion, he sprinted into the brush. But Heriberto was stuck. One of the patrol cars was parked right behind him, and two officers descended on the man who had already started the car. In a desperate final attempt to get away, Heriberto reversed, hoping to get out, but he hit the police car behind him, and before he could even think of going forward, he was pulled out of his seat and wrestled to the ground. Meanwhile, the other patrol car saw Justo streaking off into the wilderness, and the two officers jumped out in pursuit. The ground was uneven, and the overgrowth left them plenty of traps to trip over. Justo was as quick and limber as he had been when he was a teenager. He sidestepped and jumped over any obstacles with sure feet and at a breakneck speed. The officers were in great shape, but they were no match for the barefoot thief who moved as fast as lightning ahead of them. Justo cleared the patch of growth in seconds, leaving the policemen blundering around behind him. Ahead of him was a lake that was fed by a small river, and beyond that was the resort fence line. If he could get to the fence, Justo was as good as gone. There was no way they could catch up with him once he was out in the open swamp. Luckily, Justo was as good a swimmer as he was at running. Without breaking his speed, he dove into the murky water gracefully. The staff and resort goers had spilled out onto the lawn to catch a glimpse of the spectacle playing out on the grounds. One man was being handcuffed and stuffed into a dented patrol car, and the other was leading a spectacular chase that ended with a splash. The two officers in pursuit were already winded, and Justo was clearly going to win this race. But the staff of Mikasuki were horrified at the sight of the agile man streaking past them. They knew better than anyone how dangerous that water was. The resort was home to a very large alligator, which the employees playfully named Pancho. Pancho basked in the sun on the banks almost every morning, and he never paid any mind to the people. The lake was covered in signs warning everyone not to swim there due to the alligator presence. But obviously, Justo hadn't noticed any of these signs with all of his attention on his flight from the cops. The waitresses and groundskeepers yelled at him in a mix of Spanish and English, screaming that there was a gator on the other side of the lake. Pancho woke up from his slumber in the sun. All of the commotion was not at all what he had in mind this afternoon. The predator scanned the crowd and then the lake. To its surprise, there was a human swimming past him. This was unprecedented. Never before had humans ever come even close to its domain, and certainly not alone in the water. Pancho didn't need telling twice. The person swimming past him was a meal, practically gift wrap for him to take. Pancho slipped into the cool, dark lake, propelling itself with its tail so fast that not even Justo could outswim it, no matter how good of a swimmer he was. The crowd was hysterical, and some of the braver men even went to the very edge of the pond to get Justo's attention. The two police officers came to a halt where Justo had dived in. Even they started yelling for the man to get out, but Justo was deaf to their screams. The only sound in his ears was the rushing water and his heartbeat beating in his skull. And every time his head came up for air, he only had eyes for the fence line that promised freedom. He was halfway across the lake now, pumping his arms like he'd never done before. Justo was oblivious to the danger closing in on him, and the crowd stood horrified, watching the reptilian hunter sink into the water, swim toward the man, and finally, they saw the beast reach the thief and pull him smoothly and soundlessly under the water. Taken completely by surprise, Justo felt the heavy, scaled body close over his back, twisting around him as it wound Justo into its coils. The horrifying realization of what was happening hit Justo just as the gator started spinning him in its drowning death roll. But it was too late now. He was securely trapped, and his head was turned upside down while water flooded into his mouth. Justo grabbed desperately at the hard scales, trying with all of his might to pull and push the animal off him. But his efforts were useless. It was like clawing at rocks, and Pancho didn't slow down its spinning or react in any way to the man's struggles. Round and round he was thrown, screaming soundless bubbles as the animal pulled him deeper and deeper into the dark. The gator didn't waste time spinning his prey on the surface of the water like they normally do. With all the screaming and yelling from the shore, it dove deep under the water to finish the kill without any humans interfering from the surface. As it turned in circles, it squeezed its body tighter around the man. Justo felt his ribs shatter into his already waterlogged lungs. The lake water he'd inhaled was now joined with blood. The immense pressure and the unbearable pain started to fade away as he lost consciousness. He was already passed out when the creature latched onto him, landed at the bottom of the lake. It kept lying there, 50 feet below the surface, until it felt Justo's heartbeat stop. Only when it was absolutely sure that the man was dead did it release its hold. The alligator quickly repositioned its grip on Justo and swam him to a more secure location where it could feed in peace. On the lake's banks, more help had already been called, and Heriberto was driven away in handcuffs. From the back of the patrol car, he'd heard the commotion, and he was able to put together the pieces about what was happening. He was horrified and helpless to do anything about Justo's predicament, and Heriberto knew he was never going to see the man he'd known since they were teenagers. Diving teams and more police cars arrived as Heriberto was driven out of the parking lot to the nearest jail. The ride was almost completely silent, broken only by the officers giving him their condolences. Even they found the entire affair hard to absorb. Later that night, the same two officers visited Heriberto in his cell to inform him that his friend's remains had been found, that the alligator responsible for his death had been killed, and that any remains still left in its stomach had been recovered and placed with its owner. Unfortunately, Heriberto wasn't able to attend the funeral alongside his friend's family. He had no one to bail him out while he awaited his court date. So Heriberto was forced to sit on his cot on the day he knew Justo was being put into the ground, left with only his thoughts and regrets. The Miccosukee Indian Reservation never allowed another predator to make its home on the property again. If an alligator was spotted for more than 2 days in a row, they'd chase it back into the swamp where it belonged. Pancho was the last gator they ever tolerated after that day, fearing someone else would meet the same terrifying final affliction.